I grew up as an Army brat. My dad was in the Army. His dad was in the Army. My mom's dad was in the Army. My mom's brothers were all in the Army. So I had quite an Army background. Although initially that did not influence my going to West Point or going into the Army. I sort of went out on my own, and my parents were very smart. They didn't push me to follow in anyone's footsteps.
Time-honored, world-renowned, filled with great traditions, with roots in the very heart of America. This is West Point.
I ended up going to West Point and did fairly well and academically. And my dad, who had just retired from the Army, said, "Hank, you ought to go in the engineers." And I said, "Why, Dad?" He said, "I went into the artillery and I didn't learn a trade that was useful after I retired. You're not going to stay in the Army forever. And if you go into the engineers, you will learn a trade," is the term he used, a profession. And he was certainly right. 35 years in the Army was a delightful time, but then after that, I had something to do, something meaningful to contribute to society. My second assignment was on Okinawa with the 503rd Infantry, a parachute infantry outfit. And I was their engineer officer. I had a platoon, 2 platoons as a detachment. I didn't know anything about SAME, but I was invited by the president of the local chapter of SAME, and I believe it was Colonel George Fink. And he asked me to come as a young paratrooper and explain paratrooping, jumping out of airplanes, to the SAME post. So I went complete with a live soldier, all done up in his parachute and everything else. And I gave them an after-lunch talk about parachuting and jumping out of airplanes. Kind of a crazy thing to do.
Mapping the Earth, traversing it with bridges and tunnels, and moving it physically out of the way when necessary are among the basic responsibilities of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers.
He took me also to visit some of the Corps projects. So he exposed me also to the Corps of Engineers and the contract construction mission of the Corps. So that one experience in Okinawa gave me my first exposure to SAME as a professional society, and also to the Corps of Engineers that later in my career I spent almost my entire time in. My third assignment was going to graduate school to get a degree in geodetic science to prepare me to go to West Point to be an instructor. I enjoyed it thoroughly, but I had a challenge. I taught plebes, freshmen, and I taught them the first 2 hours after lunch, and it was a challenge to keep them awake. And so people over the years have asked me, "Hank, you're a fairly dynamic speaker. Where'd you get that?" I said it became as a matter of pride to keep those cadets awake for 3 years, teaching them the first 2 hours after lunch. That's what did it for me. So that's one of the main things I learned at West Point, was how to keep an audience awake. While I was stationed at West Point, the assistant commandant was a fellow named Colonel Jack Morris. He also was the president of the SAME post at West Point. I was persuaded to not only join the SAME chapter at West Point, but also to be its secretary. What I found was the joy of being a member of a professional society. There was a fraternal relationship to it, networking among peers. So that was my first real exposure to SAME and having an opportunity to understand what the benefits of membership in that society was. Sort of mid-career, I had the opportunity to command 2 different troop units. The first of those was with the 326th Engineer Battalion, 101st Airborne Division in Vietnam. Those 6 months in Vietnam were perhaps my most exciting time in my entire career. We had good missions. We built fire support bases for the infantry troops. We sort of hopscotched across the countryside. The Air Force would come in and bomb off the top of a mountaintop. We would rappel in and use chainsaws and clear it off. Then the helicopters would bring in artillery, and those artillery pieces would provide a circle of fire to provide cover for the infantry as they maneuvered. Before I was the chief, I was the director of Civil Works. So as a director of Civil Works in the Corps, I had the opportunity to work on the water resource management part, whereas before, I had been involved with the military construction as well as some of the civil works. Going forward into the chief of engineers after the director of Civil Works, it was a marvelous opportunity, the greatest honor I've ever had. And my mission was to make it as good as I could and to leave it better than I found it. So we set about to develop a statement of what our purpose was, what our mission was, and what our values were. One is, the Army should consider a concept called nation assistance, of providing assistance to hopefully friendly nations or to failed or failing states in order to give them some security, stability, and sustainability. Sustainability and a focus on the environment in addition to other things was at times a bit controversial among some. I got a call to come see a member of Congress, Jamie Whitten, the chairman of the House Appropriations Committee. But he said, "General, what's this all about?" And what I think had happened is that someone had sort of blown the whistle on me, pushing the environment too strongly. And he wanted to be sure that I wasn't doing that. And so we talked for about a half an hour. And he said at the end of it, "General, you're on the right track." I felt reinforced. I felt to have him, an old liner from the South, congressman, chairman of the House Appropriations Committee, say we were on the right track, made me feel good. Another one, in addition to sustainability and nation assistance, was partnering. Developing a relationship with a contractor so that you both establish what your common goals are, what you're really trying to do together. That partnering began to establish a relationship between ourselves and the construction industry that was so much more healthy, so much more enjoyable. Then the fourth one, we got this idea primarily from our then Assistant Secretary of the Army for Civil Works, Bob Page. Bob Page had been a CEO of engineering companies. He knew our business. And he said, "Hank, you've got too many stovepipes working and they aren't working together. You got the planners, the designers, the constructors, and then later the operations and maintenance people on the civil side, but it's not all flowing together smoothly. We need to establish project management, life cycle project management." Those concepts that not I, but the team decided we would focus on during my 4 years have stuck. They've still stayed. They got some legs. One of the things we did is to develop clear missions and goals for the society during my tenure. Every time I traveled, I would always take the opportunity to speak to an FSAME chapter. I'll confess that I took the opportunity to talk about sustainability, nation assistance, partnering, the themes that we were carrying forward with the Corps. FSAME provides today still an opportunity for continued professional development. Any professional, in my view, should be an active participant in whatever professional societies are appropriate for their particular discipline, because that's where the knowledge continues to grow. You have an opportunity to network with your friends and peers in terms of what's going on today, but you're also networking for your future, whatever that might be, in or out of the service. Be involved now while you're active, and so that when you do transition out of active involvement, part of that transition will be just a continuation of what you're already doing. It's not an abrupt change.